Let me sleep on it. Baby, baby, let me sleep on it. Let me sleep on it. I'll give it an
Last Pussycat Cast, we talked about some of the double standards that are involved in applying the age-old marriage mandate to men while maintaining the standards of women's modern sexual revolution. Our society, which now labels any hint of female accountability in a sexual relationship slut-shaming, has no problem demanding that men be accountable for both sexes.
Like it's just indicative of a lot of things. Women are allowed to do basically anything they want without question, but if men do these exact same things, then they are cads or jerks or chauvinists or whatever else you want to call them, and clearly they're going to lead to the downfall of the nation, even though women can do the exact same thing without apparently having any problems. Don't know how that works, but I guess it sucks to be you guys.
Feminists use the term slut-shaming, and they blame men for slut-shaming. They blame slut-shaming for false rape allegations, that if people wouldn't slut-shame women, they wouldn't lie and say that it was rape when they actually were having consensual sex with somebody they are embarrassed to admit that they had consensual sex with, which is bullshit, because it basically is an admission that women will throw somebody else under the bus to cover their own asses. When it's men's sexual freedom at stake, all of a sudden, slut-shaming is just fine.
We have done nothing at all to remove or equalize the responsibility for responsible sexual behavior between men and women. It's still all on the men. Whose sexuality do we see as dirty? Whose sexuality do we see as dangerous? Whose sexuality do we see as problematic? Always, 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 always the man's. Ever since women have felt that they have sexual freedom without the possible consequences of pregnancy, they have been free to, and the worst that they get is being shamed as sluts by other women.
This is the basic process of hypergamy, essentially, in that women are, of course, as we are genetically designed to do, want to seek out the higher value, more successful male. This is natural and normal in human society. The problem is that women are allowed to get away with this. And it's the only sort of societal function that is allowed like that, whereas men are beholden to society to have to capitulate to it. It is horrifying, though, at least to me, that all of the ills of this are only placed upon the man, not upon the woman. And really, I mean, it's how this goes both ways, that it not only infantilizes women, but it dehumanizes men.
There's a stark, outdated, if ever functional, double standard on what each sex is considered responsible for and what each sex is seen as entitled to expect in a relationship.
The heart balm racket was based on laws that allowed women to be compensated, to sue a former fiance for breach of promise and be compensated financially, because marriage was supposed to elevate a woman financially. And so if a man promised to marry her and then breached his promise, broke off the engagement, she was entitled to compensation for that. And what the heart balm racket was women who actually played this as a con. So what they would do is they would court a man. They would, be on their best behavior, absolutely sweet, get him to fall in love with her, everything, until he made a promise of marriage, after which they would let their true colors shine, and they would become absolute harridans, harpies, viragos, termagants, whatever you want to call them. And he would break off the engagement, at which point they would sue him. They would get their financial compensation, and then they would move on to the next guy and do it again and again.
We discussed the dueling narratives on sexual freedom that the feminist sexual revolution has dumped on women, who are now expected to view themselves as free agents while still trying to regulate men's sexuality. We looked at the assertion that men would be unaccountable cads if they don't have wives to give their lives direction. Such a belief would be deemed horribly sexist if applied in the opposite direction, even though such dedication, in the context of a functional relationship one is not pressured into, can be beneficial to the character and stability of both sexes.
Well, one of the things that I also noticed in one of the other articles that you posted was that somebody was saying, oh, men who don't marry, they grow up to become problems to society. They don't settle down and become happy with a partner and have children or whatever. They go on and they become delinquents and deplorables, and they don't do anything for society, and they don't settle down the way men are supposed to do. And it's an awfully uncharitable view of men to assume that just because some men don't want to get married, that they're automatically going to become problematic to society.
When women have children, they scale down their participation in the workforce. When men have children, they scale up their participation in the workforce. That is just the way it has always been. That is how things work. And so if you are relying on male productivity to make your society function, and men are not marrying and are not having children, then you are essentially relying on people who have no reason to be more productive than the bare minimum. When you go a few levels up and you actually look down on the situation and you see that, we are prioritizing women's education, we are prioritizing women in the workplace. These are women who will, regardless of whether they're married or not, still want to take breaks in their careers when they have children. They will still want to, and they will demand their employers pay for that, and the government, right? They will still want to only return part-time if possible. And therefore, right? Therefore, a female doctor just isn't going to give you as much doctoring as a male doctor over the course of her career, and all of these things, right? When you look at all of these issues, it's incredibly understandable that people in charge of policy, people who are looking at things from a sociological angle and not an individualistic angle, are freaking the fuck out about the fact that men are bugging out, right? They're bugging out of the situation that makes them the most productive.
Well,
right? And the government is not willing to cut off the gravy train for women. It's not willing to say, men aren't willing to marry you bitches and raise your kids. We're not paying for that either. No, the government is going to pay for that until the day everything comes tumbling down.
Women are looking for somebody to support them financially, and they used to be willing to trade being a supporting partner, intellectually, psychologically, emotionally, and physically for their husband. And that has changed dramatically. And men aren't getting anything for being that financially supporting partner, much less being all of those other things as well. So it's not a big surprise that men aren't marrying. But since I do have to work tonight and we do have to have time for the after show, I'm going to be a horrible cunt and make this a cliffhanger. 2 weeks from now, on the next Pussycat Cast, we will have part 2. We ended the broadcast in the midst of discussing the concept of how marriage and family can lead to maturity. We began to look at differences between the sexes in how this manifests. We looked at why authorities have incentive to promote marriage and how government interference has removed incentives to marry. This week, the discussion continues on Pussycat Cast 18.1, The Marriage Mandate Continued. Welcome to Pussycat Cast 18.1, listeners old and new. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with the Professor of Precision, Aidan Paladin, Woozle Slayer, Karen Strawn, that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and, as always, the Supreme Doge in charge. To separate... Oh, I'm skipping my introduction here. The Supreme Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, who does have a name. To separate the wisdom
I mean, but my pronouns are supreme, doge, in charge, though.
Yes,
so
well, that goes without saying. Except I said that part, didn't I? But here we are to separate the wisdom from the dysfunction in one of several examples of society's utilitarian attitude toward men. Marriage. Before we start, though, I've got a couple of quick notes. First, a brief reminder, as we said 2 weeks ago, this is not a disapproval of anyone's autonomous choices. We're not opposed to either MGTOW or marriage, just to a society that seems to entitle everyone to make men's choices for them, except men themselves. And second, if you want to join the chat, please go to the Badger Livestreams channel. And now that YouTube is designating everything its Google overlords deem politically incorrect, wrongthink, and punishing in accordance with the rules of social justice, if you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because the site finally dropped the axe on our channels, go to badgerfeed.com. Also, if we're going to be moving to a digest format for podcasting, so if you're listening to this in an audio format and you still want to be able to follow our uncut live streams, you will also find those at badgerfeed.com. So just go to badgerfeed.com. Don't make me march you there with a shotgun. Today, we're going to go through another couple of factors related to the topic that we discussed last week, or 2 weeks ago. 3 if we have time. We've mostly covered the writer's complaints about men not marrying and discussed the dysfunction in those complaints, but we did cut off in the middle of the conversation, so I'm going to give Aiden Paladin the first word tonight because she didn't get to make her point the last time. And since she didn't get to say what she was going to say in the last Pussycat cast, go ahead, Aiden, let's start us off.
I'm remembering because I rewatched the end of it, if I'm remembering it correctly. A lot of it was about, we were discussing in the end, the idea that women essentially have this we were talking about this earlier a little bit before the show, of how academia works and how women basically are able to, at one point, it was a little bit kind of presumed that women went to college on some level to pick up a husband, and for that reason then would go home and would raise the family, and that was not seen as abnormal. However, now that's of course seen as very abnormal, although it does still of course occur. The problem now is that women basically have to go get their Mrs. degree, and they have no intention of finding a husband, and because they're being told to by the feminist narrative, and moreover, men have no reason to want to marry a woman out of college because of all the reasons that we described and have been described in extreme detail of to why men would want to avoid marriage. And again, I apologize for my voice being a little bit deeper. I'm a little bit sick, but it's strange to me though that why then there seems to be this really weird disconnect in that no one wants to bring up the fact that more and more women are getting college degrees. And this is another point that it's unrelated to what I said before, but it's something that's interesting to bring up for the second part of this. If you all, I'm imagining, saw Sargon at MythCon. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
you're asking.
Saw the aftermath because a lot of us don't get to go to conventions very much. I don't know if everybody else saw it, but I did see some of the aftermath. Are you still there, Aiden?
Oh, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
My point is something that guy brought up is a very interesting study that I had actually read, and when I was watching that unfold, I couldn't respond to, of course. But the interesting thing is that guy brought up, I can't remember his name. It's so generic, I always forget it. Tom Smith. Yeah, it's very forgettable. That he brought up that, for example, there's research that shows, for example, that employers, if they are given an exactly identical two resumes that are identical, one says the person is a man and one says the person is a woman, and well, what we find is that they tend to choose the man over the woman, but that's very obvious why they would do that. It's not because they're sexist. It's not because they hate women. It's because that woman is very, very likely within 5 years to quit her job, particularly if she's young, to have children and to raise children. So some of this, and as an academic, it also is strange to me, while we put this extreme emphasis on women of getting degrees, women have to be educated to an extreme level. Meanwhile, there is no concern with the fact that men are at an extraordinary degree, and to an extraordinarily disturbing, to me at least, extent, failing in all levels of education. There's just no concern with that. But why are women going to university? Because that was kind of one of the original purposes, was to go to university. And you can read Charles Murray's Coming Apart on this too, which he talks about the creation of a new class system of totally different levels of people that are just academics, essentially. This is disturbing, though, because it indicates to me that there's been this fundamental disconnect between men and women that's happened in the West, that we're like not understanding each other anymore in the way that we used to.
And this is something that I've been kind of watching, and I was a bit aware of it when I was growing up, simply because my mom talked about it. She's a school teacher. She's retired. My parents are both retired now, but I mean, they both went to school to become teachers. And both of them went to school with that as their primary goal. They met each other there. So my mom got her MRS degree at university, but that wasn't her goal of going. In fact, she was engaged when she went. And according to both her and my father, she was engaged to a dipshit. So you go to school to learn that the guy that you thought was the best guy in the world in high school when you were an immature high school kid, and he was an immature high school kid. You know, the guys that have grown up past high school are much cooler. But in any case, she went to school with a lot of women who didn't finish because they got married. And everybody thought that she wasn't going to finish when she got married. And when I was in school, you know, years and years later, I had the same experience with a lot of women who didn't finish because they got married. They get like partway through school and they get married, and then they don't really have to get a degree because there's going to be somebody supporting them, and so they quit. Or some of them had babies and quit. And so, and their whole experience at the time was very different from what I'm seeing today. When I was teaching, there was a very different dynamic between the students. And it might have just been because it was in my classroom and I wasn't one of the students anymore. But it just seemed like the guys had to walk a little more on eggshells than I remember the guys walking when I was in school. And the women that I was teaching were a little quicker to jump on them than I remember the gals I went to school with being, over things that should have been funny, you know. And that's been 10 years almost. Actually, it has been 10 years because it's 2017 now. Time flies. But it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and it's getting to the point now where there's a significant number of young women who treat all of the men around them as if they are less human. And they're going to school to almost get trapped in an academic cycle. You have to get your bachelor's, but in order to get the job you want, you got to have a higher degree, and so on. And then they're going into professions where there's a lot less jobs than they think there are, or they're going into professions without double checking what they're being told by the universities. For instance, here in the Dayton metro area, there are 5 universities churning out licensed massage therapists like McDonald's churns out cheeseburgers. And they're telling all of them that this is a highly marketable skill. And it is, just not around here because the place is flooded with licensed massage therapists. So if you don't want to leave Dayton, you shouldn't become one. Now, becoming a nurse here is good because there are multiple hospitals. and there are multiple nursing homes, and there are multiple home health care organizations. But becoming a licensed massage therapist, everybody thinks that's going to be an easier job, a more fun job, a more rewarding job, because they don't understand nursing. And they think it's going to be an easier job to get, an easier degree to get, because they don't realize they have to study all the same anatomy and physiology. And they go through all of that, and then they have to go back to school and back to school and back to school. And I've seen women that are in my circle of friends go into some of these professions. One who was one of the witnesses in the 7 Years in Hell case was going into psychology, and her original goal was to help men. She came out of it a feminist. So it's academia itself has become a very toxic place. And Wikipedia snippet says, it sounds like you were going to say licensed misogynist. That's one of my favorite jokes. My husband is a licensed massage therapist and a certified auto tech. Go figure. And he works in a factory. Go figure.
Stories like that just give me a nightmare.
Yeah, well, I always say he's a licensed misogyn therapist.
Well, your husband is a licensed massage therapist, but actually men who have massage therapists certification, dental hygienist, any profession where you're up in somebody's personal space,
they have much harder time.
Men are going to have a hard time. Men are going to have a really hard time finding a job at all, and they'll be paid less when they do. Yeah. Yeah,
and that was something that my husband has experienced. And to be honest, I do hold it against other people, because and it's really stupid because I've got chronic pain, and I have had to have prescribed massage therapy, and I have never met anybody who does it half as well as my husband does. He really knows what he's doing.
Well,
there's a lot of people that aren't benefiting from it because they would be uncomfortable with a man. And he's had both clients that couldn't walk because of their pain. Yeah. And he worked on them, and they played golf afterward.
But it's both. It's not just men and the homophobic thing.
Oh no, it's
women as well. And the rape phobic thing.
Well,
right?
There's another aspect to it too.
Yeah.
Your workplace, if you are a licensed massage therapist, your workplace is very gynocentric. It is full of women. Almost everyone you work with will be a woman. You'll probably, if you work at a physical therapy clinic, there will be doctors there. If you work at a chiropractor's office, the chiropractor will probably be a man, because that job takes more muscle. But working with female licensed massage therapists it can be like being the only man in the human resources department.
Well, they wonder, right? And these women, I have heard from men, I have had men write to me, who were male nurses and one of the male nurses who wrote to me, he said that, essentially he was assigned all of the tasks, like
he was the workhorse.
Catheters into men's penises, cleaning under men's foreskins.
The dirty job guy and the heavy lifting guy.
The heavy lifting guy, the dirty job guy, and the guy who dealt with the men who the women didn't want to touch because ew, right? And it was like, and he said, even though he was willing to do all of this stuff, the dirty jobs, the heavy lifting, the clean up the puke and the snot, and the shit kind of jobs, right? Even though he was willing to do that without complaint, he still had to deal with this kind of back channel whispering campaign of, why does he even want to be a nurse? There must be something wrong with him, from his female colleagues.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
see, now I witnessed that too as a nurse's aide. Years ago, I used to work in nursing homes back when I could still lift people. For the audience, if you haven't heard it before, I have been rear-ended as a passenger in other people's cars numerous times, and I worked at two different nursing homes, and there were times when I was the biggest woman there, so I was the heavy lifting guy. So I have a herniated disc in my lower back. That's part of the reason why I have chronic pain, but not the entire reason. And so I can't do that job anymore. But when I did do that job, I noticed anytime we got a guy, whether it was a male aide or a male nurse whose job was separate from the jobs of the nurses' aides, he was asked to do nurses' aide tasks that involved heavy lifting and, a nurse's aide is a professional butt wiper, but if they had a particularly dirty job, they went and got the guy. I was the only one that didn't go get the guy to clean up puke and shit. And this is something that,
What is frustrating for me about this, right? And one of the things is, like, when I went to visit my father-in-law with the family in the nursing home, and he's committed because he essentially lost his mind. He had multiple head injuries, multiple chemical exposures. He was one among the first airdropped into Vietnam. He was in the British SAS. So he had this, and then he switched. He transferred to the New Zealand military. He had this long, illustrious military career, but he ended up just completely losing his marbles. And they think it's, a combination of all of the stuff that happened to him, and then early onset Alzheimer's disease, right? So he's really the last thing to go, the last things that he could talk about where he was making any kind of sense were, dirty jokes and stuff like that. I mean, that was really, if he was telling you a dirty joke, he would make sense, but any other thing that he was trying to tell you. But at the same time, he has all of this training, right? Which is why he had to be put in a secure facility, because he was a potential danger to himself and others. And the one staff member on staff who actually understood how to communicate with him, how to deal with him, right? How to anticipate that he was getting upset, why he was getting upset, right? And head that off at the pass, was a male attendant, right? And he's too busy wiping asses and lifting heavy people to actually be doing the other part of his job, which is to essentially deal face-to-face, one-on-one, in a personable way with these patients, right? So, and he was absolutely excellent and not scared. He wasn't a big man. This attendant, this orderly, I guess, or home care attendant. He was not a big man. He was not a particularly strong man. My father-in-law is 6'4", and could snap anybody like a twig even now, right? But he actually understood that sort of the hyper masculine mindset of somebody who'd been in the military in a special forces team for a long time, and is losing his freaking mind in order to avoid certain types of crises, right? And steer the situation away from those. And he was on fucking bedpan duty. He was on, roll this fat person over duty. He was busy doing other things, right? The things that men should be doing. And right. He's not nurturing, right? And all of this stuff. And the women had no idea how to deal with my father-in-law. And 99% of them were terrified of him, right? And that came through in how they dealt with him. And so the entire thing was just absolutely egregious until finally we moved him to a different facility that's designated specifically for people like my father-in-law who have that military or law enforcement history. And so the staff are trained, to never use words like wound, right? Because it could be potentially triggering and all of this stuff. And all of the staff, and I hate to say it, but all of the staff are white because these guys have served overseas and they're out of, like, they've lost their minds, right? They are not rational. And so when a Filipina or a Vietnamese woman is looking after them, they don't know necessarily whether they're in a secure care facility in Edmonton, Alberta, or whether they're in a POW camp,
Yeah.
right? In 1971. They don't know.
That
Right?
was something that I saw at the nursing homes that I worked at. Now, it wasn't so much with military personnel, but there was like what you're talking about. Whenever I hear that women are naturally more empathic toward other people than men, I
Florence
almost
Nightingale.
I want to
Florence
shit
Nightingale
myself.
had
Just,
some things to say about that.
it's such bullshit. Men and women are
Well-
they both have the capacity to be naturally empathic to other people. We do it very differently from each other, and men are expected in many, many ways to be naturally empathic towards other people and not rewarded for it and not acknowledged for it. Whereas women are acknowledged for it and it gets pointed out with kudos, oh, isn't she such a nice lady? That lady is an angel, blah, 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 just for doing things a lot of times that are the equivalent of things or the same things that men are expected to do without a single thank you. And because of that, there's a lot of times when women don't pay attention to things that in older societies, 100 years ago, women might have noticed, at least middle class and lower class women would have noticed because they had to take care of their families at home. You didn't put your family in a nursing home if you were poor. You didn't put your family members in a nursing home if you were middle class. You put them in a care facility if you were wealthy and could pay for it. So you had your parents living with you. You had maybe your elderly aunt or uncle living with you. If you had a handicapped child, that child lived with you until you died, and you hoped one of their siblings would take care of them afterward. And that's just the way things were. And then women were more overtly empathic. But at the nursing homes I worked at, there were women who didn't understand that the type of modesty that everyone is expected to understand women have also exists in men. So if you're going to walk into a guy's room and change his clothes so he can get up for his day, he's in his pajamas and you can put his day clothes on him, or he's in his day clothes and it's bedtime and you're going to put his pajamas on him, you don't just walk up to him and start stripping him without talking to him first and telling him why you're there and asking his permission and so on, even if, or especially if, he's senile. And, there was a fellow that I took care of that he'd knock you across the room. And I really couldn't blame him. I mean, some strange person walk up to me and start unbuttoning my shirt, I'd knock him across the room too. But these women would act like he was abusive. And I could go in there and I had no problem with him because I expected him to respond to me the same way I would respond to me if I did what they were doing. And so I talked to him. It didn't matter, that it didn't matter that we couldn't carry on a conversation, although I could get him to sing church hymns with me. And like it was that way with a lot of people. You find a way to connect with somebody. And you treat them like a human being, even when they can't give you the human responses that you're accustomed to. You find a human connection. That's what constitutes a caregiver. And it used to be that
definitely.
women understood that way better at the class level that usually does these jobs. Because we can all be honest, rich ladies do not become nurses' aides. But no, it's not like that anymore. It's just not.
Oh, Prim was first, I think, so.
um, well, actually, there was a lot of different things that I wanted to bring up now because you went over so many different things. The first example I was going to bring up was actually somebody that I talked to about how they were trying to be a nurse, and it was a guy, and he was in a class of women. I'm pretty sure he was the only guy, as seems often to be the case. And they were going over one example of there was a woman giving birth, and one of the supervisors was basically trying to, almost push him out. Like, okay, well, obviously this is not something that you're going to be interested in. And then he's like, no, like I very much have a right to see this. Like, this is going to be an important aspect of my job. In fact, this is kind of where I want to end up in the end, actually. And, everybody has a different thing they want to go to, and it's not fair to generalize based on sex, but they were basically pushing this guy out as though, oh, well, obviously you have no purpose in this room. So, be on your merry way. But I also wanted to bring up an example of somebody when I was volunteering at the crisis hotline that I was volunteering at. We had a regular call-in, and I can't really give the details about that, of course, but a lot of the other volunteers, they had trouble dealing with him because they just would try and end the conversation as quickly as possible. So when people were telling me about him, they'd be like, oh, you probably have some troubles with this guy because X and X. But I actually had no problems with him at all because I just found those connections with him, and I talked with him like he was not an annoyance, but like a normal human being. And believe it or not, I never had any problems with him. And the last thing that I want to say is to how you were talking about how women are kudos for being interpersonal and all of that good stuff, but men are basically not given any respect for that, even though men are often interpersonal on like a larger scale. Like, men are more expected to, go to war, for example. They give their lives for their countries. They sign up for more dangerous jobs like firefighting. They go and protect people, and yet oftentimes they're treated as though this is something that is just expected of them.
And in contrast, that's actually what I was wanted to mention too. It's that we have this idea that women are more empathetic. That's not correct. What women are, based on averages from extensive sociological research and social science research, are more nurturing. On average, that doesn't mean that men are not capable of that. It does mean that women tend to have this kind of like baby bird nurturing sort of thing that they tend to do. But then the disturbing factor of society that we get then is that when you have a male who feels empathy, that's treated as somehow wrong or incorrect, whereas there's nothing about empathetic behavior that is any different between male or female responses to behavior or to stimuli. In fact, they tend to be equally empathetic. It's just this like nurturing and caring behavior. And therefore, also, if we want to talk about sexism, it really is sexist to think that because men possess the equal amount of empathy that women do, that because they go into fields such as, elderly care or something, that therefore they're being unmasculine. Yeah, that's a little bit evident of the inherent sexism that we actually do have in our society.
Some men protect by becoming police officers, and some men protect by becoming elder care providers. And they're both protective positions, really.
I think too, like the whole bifurcation of, or the narrowing of our idea of what empathy and compassion is to something that is essentially hugging somebody and crying your tears with them, right? Rather than actually taking some kind of action to alleviate suffering, right? That some kind of action to alleviate suffering, which includes, running into a burning building or pushing somebody off of the train tracks, somebody's vehicle that's stalled, or pulling somebody off of the subway tracks, or whatever, right? These acts, these often subconsciously generated, I think, in terms of a lot of men, just having experienced having experienced being the only one in a position to act to save lives, right? And doing so knowing, and experiencing that while knowing that I was risking my life to do it. I do feel that a lot of men's impulses toward that are they are very much biologically programmed to crush fear, and even even that kind of compassion that would lead you to cry when, those sympathetic tears when you see somebody who is hurting, when you see somebody who is in pain, right? And you cry. And I actually was just in that position today, where I was, crying over somebody else's pain, right? Well, all of that, when there is a crisis, all of that just goes out the window. And you don't care about hurting that other person. Sometimes you have to hurt them more to save their lives or to get them, out of the situation. And I think that men have a greater ability to naturally suppress all of that stuff and actually take action towards, in the service of their compassion, towards alleviating suffering in that way than women do. I think that men have a greater tendency to do this, but we don't see it as compassion because these men are not sort of gushing about how sympathetic they feel about, the situation. They're not gushing about, and being effusive about it. They're not weeping tears while they're doing it. They're just doing it. And oftentimes that female form of compassion is very, it's very melodramatic, and it's very, I guess, camera friendly, right? But it doesn't involve any kind of risk, right? It doesn't risk anything to sit next to a hospital bed and weep with somebody as their life is ending, right? What necessitates risk and compassion is to, dive into an undertow and pull somebody out, right? That's what, and you can't cry, and you can't be distracted by your fear or your grief or, oh my goodness, what if they die? You can't be distracted by any of that. And yet that is an act of compassion as well. And I think that our modern sentiment in terms of all of this, we have mistaken sentimentality for passion, and we have
courage.
Well, and we have essentially described compassion as sitting and weeping with someone rather than doing something to actually change the situation for a person who is suffering.
And all of those are expressions of empathy or compassion, which is what men and women are equal in their capacity for this. It's just because women supposedly are better at nurturing, which we do find that
nurturing.
We're better at expressing the emotional side of it. We're not necessarily better. Len, I'll give you a real quick example, and then I'm gonna call on Brian because we have some super chats, and also he hasn't gotten a chance to say anything about this, and I didn't know if he had anything to say about this. But my examples, of course, are going to be my dad. Dad's the one that I really learned to understand practical compassion from. And what Karen described just a few minutes ago, that's practical compassion. And my dad, when I was a kid, this is one of my favorite stories about him too. He figured me out real fast. I have this memory of this toy rattle I used to have, this little blue rattle that the handle was a circle, and I had a little wooden toy that was one of my two first puzzles, and it was just basically concentric circles of wood that slid over a post to make a Christmas tree, and there was a little ball that sat on top, and I figured out the little ball was just the right size to fit in that little hole in the rattle. And being a little kid, I just wanted to put that in there because I wanted to see if I was right. And I remember that. That's all I really remember from the story, but my dad has told me the rest. He remembers the rest. He said he came along and helped me because I was getting very frustrated, and I threw a temper tantrum, absolute temper tantrum. And normally when a kid throws a temper tantrum, they get in trouble. But it immediately struck him that the temper tantrum was because I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to conquer the puzzle, and I wanted to do it via my own efforts and resources. And so he took it apart and he gave it back to me. Well, now that I knew it fit in there, I was really gunning to get it done, and I worked on it until I did it. And from that, he figured out that I needed puzzle toys. And I had, all kinds of toys that you had to solve, as a puzzle. And I had all kinds of toys that you had to put together and take apart and stuff like that. I had Legos. I had all, things that you built. That was a type of compassion and empathy that people don't think of when they think of compassion and empathy. The other end of it was when I was older and they were told I wasn't going to survive if something didn't change because my asthma was so bad. And my dad saw that sports were helping me to improve my breathing abilities. But they were also kind of torturous for me. And he's the one that stuck it out with me. He's the one that went to all of my meets, all of my matches, everything that I did, and watched me struggle and suffer through it. And it was bad enough that I would look like I was dying when I would finish a race, and I would pass out and he would walk me while I was unconscious. And you could sit there and feel sorry for somebody in that situation, although I never really would have wanted anybody to feel sorry for me in that situation, because I was winning. Even though I was losing the race, I was beating the asthma, so I was winning. But mom's degree of sympathy and mom's manifestation of sympathy there was to feel for me. Oh my gosh, that's so hard. I can't stand it. Dad's was, if I can just be there and be encouraging enough, she can do this. And mom would have had to do that if something had happened to my dad when I was a kid. And I know my mom, she would have stepped up and done it. But because dad was there, she didn't have to. And so that's my sort of detailing of practical compassion. You do what's best for the person, not necessarily what makes the person feel better at the time, and not necessarily what makes you feel better about the person's experiences. But we do have some super chats, and so Doge, you're up.
Okay. All right, let me just scroll up because it's been a little while. By the way, guys, if you're listening, let me know what my volume is like. I noticed that, there was some people saying that I was a little low, and
you're a little quiet.
You are a little low.
All right, let me try. Okay, wait, hold up. Let me.
There. Oh, that's better. That's
better.
How about now?
Okay, you're a little loud now.
Okay, I'm a little too loud. How about that?
You're good.
How about
you're
that?
good right there. That's perfect.
That's good. All right, I'm gonna do that then. Okay, so super chats. We have a few. Brandon Shaver at about 7:19 gave us $5 and says, "When do you think the marriage mandate be considered homophobic or heterocentric by some on the left?" Okay, that was just his statement. I can throw it through. You want to answer real quick, and then
I don't quite understand the question. Homophobic or heterocentric? When do you think that became homophobic and or heterocentric? I think marriage has always been considered heterocentric.
Yeah.
I think that the only time marriage has ever been considered homophobic was when LGBT people began to agitate for same-sex marriage, and then it began being seen as homophobic to oppose that. But marriage is inherently heterocentric. I think that's just an intrinsic aspect of what marriage has always been as a tradition.
What the goal is, kids?
Well, I mean, marriage as an institution has always been about identifying the fathers of children, holding those men responsible for their children and for the mothers of their children. So that's That's essentially the entire, it has always been at its heart an economic contract where men are required to invest in their children and the mothers of their children, and marriage was required in the age before birth control and DNA tests. Marriage was necessary in order to not impose the obligations on the wrong man, to hold the right man responsible for the children that he helped produce, right? So that's essentially all it has really been. Or that's been the primary function of it, and the primary reason why I think it worked so well. So of course that's going to be heterocentric. Two men can't produce children, two women can't produce children. There was no need for, and
Right.
there was no need for marriage for same-sex couples until things like tax breaks for married people, and certain benefits for married people, and health insurance, right? Health insurance to be able to have your same-sex spouse included in your health insurance, right? Like, until the government got involved in marriage, there would have been no real reason for same-sex couples. There would have been no inherent benefit, for that, because they couldn't produce children.
Now, I think
So
I don't know if they were asking by the wording of the question. It's hard to tell if they were asking whether marriage has been, when the marriage mandate became considered homophobic, or when will it become considered homophobic. And if, like what Karen's talking about, also indicates that the answer to that is going to be it won't, until society stops defining men's value by their benefit to women. They won't consider pushing men to get married to be a homophobic thing until the society at large stops pushing men to serve women. And I think, even in gay relationships, even in gay men's relationships and gay women, people will push them to marry each other, and they won't even know why they think that's so important. And the reasoning behind it is because of the tradition that exists due to the mandate for men to dedicate themselves to women, in service to women. And until we get rid of that, marriage will always be, it'll always be considered politically correct, even as it's dying as an institution.
Okay, Aiden, you were going to say?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, when you look at a lot of the people who support this stuff, they tend to be followers of a little bit more of a socialist sort of line of thinking. And it is true today. Like Sarah Wolf, I believe her name, or Susan Wolf, 2009, I just read her book, which is Sexuality and Socialism, History, Politics, and the Theory of LGBT Liberation. That book actually does say that men are pretty much intrinsically responsible for all LGBT, particularly gay, repression, because inherently, if you look at the system, Marx and Engels, that men are responsible for the patriarchy, and that they're responsible for marriage, and that all the woes and ills of society come out of this process of inheritance. That is, I love my children and I want to provide for them, and that is somehow wrong.
Yeah, no, it's and this it bugs me, because this is exactly what has got us to where we are. This is why we're not like the fucking chimpanzees and the bonobos, right? Is because we do things in the way that we do them, which is we have harnessed all men's, or virtually all men's, urge to procreate, right? And their willingness to invest in their children when they know that those children are theirs. And we have harnessed that as a motivation to not just get men to work and be the workhorses of society, but also to convince men to cooperate with each other. You don't see cooperation species where the degree of male-male cooperation in species where 5% of the males or 20% of the males hoard all of the reproductive opportunities. You just don't.
Exactly. And this is the thing, is that they want us to stop being chimps, which we're much more closely related to, and want us to become bonobos, which never gonna happen.
Well, but even if it did happen, okay, how do bonobo males interact? Virtually no conspecific violence, right? Within the group, but virtually no conspecific cooperation within the group. The males are closer to their mothers than they are to any of the other males. The males are completely socially isolated from each other, right? They don't socially groom. They don't do any male bonding. They don't cooperate on hunts. They don't cooperate on border patrols. Their mothers do their fucking courting for them, pick their fucking potential mates and do the courting for them, right? These males are just essentially, in bonobo society, the males are dead weight, right? And all they do is look after themselves. The males in bonobo society are essentially MGTOW, right? They are going their own way, but they are MGTOW without any sense of brotherhood, without any sense of, yeah, us guys are in it together. No, nothing, right? It's like, I love my mom, right? And that's it. That's it. And what you get is a species that has 30 to 60,000 individuals who only still exist because chimpanzees haven't learned to fucking swim yet, and human beings are protecting them.
Pretty much. Also, interestingly enough, I would a little bit of an aside. MGTOW in human society is a reactionary thing.
It is.
Whereas the MGTOW in bonobo society, if you want to call it that, is absolutely inherent. And this is why I find this so terrifying, because this appears to be a sociological sort of experiment on a large scale, again, to move humans more towards a bonobo-esque society and away from the chimpanzee society that we inherently are more associated and closer to. That's horrifying, not only because it's at odds with our basic proclivities, but because this has very, very bad outcomes both for men and for women.
Well, and especially for children, right? And
absolutely.
I mean, you look at like, okay, so chimpanzees, they score lower on IQ tests in the lab. Well, why do they score lower than bonobos? Well, because they're too busy looking at their neighbor's paper, really pay attention to the task that they have been set. Right? The competition, right? And it seems to, with males, it seems to be that competition and cooperation are, you either have both or you have neither, right? Okay, and so you have these male chimpanzees who are too busy looking at their neighbor's paper and seeing how their neighbor is doing, right, to really focus on the task at hand. So in the lab, in laboratory conditions, they do worse than bonobos do. But out in nature, right? You have bonobos, oh, I have a bent stick, right? Do I dig grubs with it, or do I masturbate with it? Those are the two choices, right? You have chimpanzees who are much better at passing on knowledge. They actually have culture that includes males. And this is one of the things about bonobo society that is really, really terrifying, is that culture, right? Culture as a set of beliefs, knowledge, values, whatever, that is passed person to person or individual to individual, right? That is what is defined as culture, is actual learning that happens above and beyond instinct, right? In bonobo society, you don't have males passing on knowledge to other males. You don't have males sharing understanding of the world with other males. You don't have any of that, right? In chimpanzee society, no matter how much more competitive it is between the in-group males, you at least have them sharing, here's how to make a compound tool. Yeah. Here's how to make, here's how to actually, make a spear and throw it. Right
now, the thing I'm to do now, Karen, is to relate that to humans, which is pretty easy because we know that that's what parents of both sexes do with their kids.
Yes,
but I'm going to be an obnoxious bitch.
I know
here
you're going to be
because
horrible and
this
drag
is
us back on topic.
this
Yes,
is the
I know.
short show night because it's the night that I do this and then go to work on Thursdays. I
Oh.
would
Alright.
like to propose before we I'm not that kind of proposal. I know we're talking about marriage, but I would like to propose that we do a show on this. Actually, sometime in the distant future, with the two of you, and maybe if we can get Allison on it and do a discussion on this specific topic, because and back and forth, but keep it to where it's related to human evolution as well, because I think there are people in our audience that would really like to listen to that. But definitely on a day when we're not doing a show on humans and marriage. So, Brian, if you want to go on to the next.
Yeah, I'll just go quickly through them. Nordry underscore EQNL gave us £5. Didn't say anything, so thanks for the money. The Chaos 1X gave us $5 and says, my small arts college has gone insane. I nearly failed a class when I didn't agree Bugs Bunny cross-dressing was proof that we hate trans people.
Okay, I do have a response to that.
Okay,
I have
go
one
ahead.
response. Okay, I'm done.
All right.
Okay, you need to
Go.
need to warn me to take my
Sorry.
earbuds out before you
Sorry,
do
Karen.
that again.
That was
okay?
that should have been a headphone warning on that. R.I.P. My ears and headphone users. Press F to pay respects. Okay, so Clockwork Owl gave us $10 and says, "Hey y'all, just made me realize the news story about Trump calling the dead soldier's mom has focused entirely on the mom's feelings and not the fact that a brave man has died." And I know that was the thing that Karen had watched recently, the John Kelly thing, I think his name is. We can come back to that, but there's definitely something to be said about that. You know, it's sort of like Hillary Clinton saying, you know, the greatest victims of war are the mothers and daughters and wives of the men that die. So yeah, and then Dagon Naxos gave us $20 and says, "Oh look, a man being compassionate through charity. How misogynistic of me! Somebody call Big Red on me." And then I got two more. Rob Wynn gave us $8 and didn't say anything. So thank you, Rob Wynn, for the $8. And then Joey Jojo gave us $5. And he says the 80-20 rule is such BS. And most women hate that men have alternatives to sex. So basically, I just have to be alone without any contact with women. Okay, I'm done. That's all the super chats so far.
I think that you should completely, Joey Jojo, I think you should completely ignore what women tell you to do in regards to your sexuality when it doesn't involve them. It's one thing.
They don't know what they want anyway.
Right, well, it's one thing to advocate for, you know, obviously bodily autonomy is everybody's right, and that's fine. Feminists can defend consent, yay, as long as, you know, they're defending both sexes' right to refuse, which most of them don't. But women do not have the right to refuse your choice to do something with somebody else or something else that doesn't involve them. That's not a woman's right. Not unless, you know, it's a life partner and you're violating the relationship. And even then, you know, your partner doesn't really have the right to stop you. They just have the right to be angry if you cheat on them and to leave. But this idea that if women try to control your sexuality, you gotta listen, is absolute bullshit. You can tell them to fuck off. Tell them to absolutely fuck right the hell off.
Yeah, like, go MGTOW, like, be in a relationship, do whatever you want, but make your own choice. Don't do what anybody else tells you that you should be doing. That's basically what part 2 and part 1 have been about, right? Making your own choices outside of everybody else's opinion.
Absolutely.
Now we have a question.
Well, I would
address here real quick from the Eyes of John asked us this, and we've been having people ask us this a lot.
Okay.
And I know there's going to be a fundraiser coming up related to this, so I'm going to answer it real quick. Eyes of John says, "Hey, is there any update on the lawsuit with Calgary Expo?" Yes, we go to court next month. The last update was that we had to deal with a bunch of minutia that the other side threw into the case at the last hearing, so it didn't all get settled. And the actual hearing itself is going to be taking place next month. And I will have to retweet the blog post on that sometime in the next couple of days so that people know what's going on. Because it's been a year. You guys have been waiting for a year to find out what's going to happen. That's a long cliffhanger. But it's just the wheels of justice turn very slowly. And that's when it was scheduled. It's the end of November. We will be going back to court in Calgary. So that's the answer to that.
Yes, that is the answer to that. It is not the full answer to that, but I am not at liberty to disclose.
Right, that's as much as we can tell
fun.
you. But court is coming up. We will have our day in court. You will have your day to see us go and fight.
Yeah, well, you won't. You only if you show up in the courtroom, because cameras are not allowed in the courtrooms in Canada. So
no, but we will come out and tell you what happened. So
none
as
of
much
this
as we're allowed.
Televised. But if anybody in Calgary wants to show up on those court dates, you can tweet things while sitting in the courtroom observing proceedings. Apparently that is okay. You just cannot take pictures and you cannot record anything, but you can tweet, "Oh my God, so-and-so just said this," right? You can do that. Live tweeting from inside the courtroom. It was going on during the Greg Allen Elliott trial. I'm sure that it's okay to do in Alberta. So
yeah, and to my understanding, what we learned the last time is if you wanted to cover it as like a journalist or something like that, you had to apply and get permission, and it was possible to do that. But you did have to apply. There was a deadline to apply ahead of time. You couldn't wait and apply like the day before. So it may already be too late to do that.
As a member of the public, however, you are perfectly entitled to show up on any day and attend any trial. So
right. It just I don't bring a camera or anything like that into the courtroom and expect to be able to use it, because that's not going to happen. But going on, Karen, you also had something that you were going to say about, unless it sort of disappeared in the midst of the other stuff. You still there, Karen?
Karen, did you want to say something else?
Did you?
Yes. Sorry. I was going to say that, in terms of the Congresswoman, Trump calling the dead soldier's mom has focused entirely on the mom's feelings, right? The news story. Well, the news story was manufactured outrage on the part of a congresswoman who was eavesdropping on a call that the president didn't have to make to a bereaved family of a service member in the military. And one of the things that he said was he knew what he was getting into. And this congresswoman took this in the most feminist way possible and sort of interpreted it as victim blaming and called Trump a sociopath for saying it. And this was actually, I was extremely upset about this when I was watching John Kelly address the situation to reporters for, I think, 18 minutes or something like that, right? That most presidents don't make these calls. Trump had come to him for advice on what do I say? I've never been in uniform. I've never served. I want to make this call, right? I want to honor this family and this soldier, right? But I don't quite know how to handle it. And one of the things John Kelly told him was, whenever I have to make that call, I say, he went in with his eyes wide open. He knew what he was getting into. He knew the risks, right? He did what he did regardless of the risks, right? That is what makes sacrifice meaningful is that he knew exactly what he was getting into, and he did it anyway. He was courageous enough to do it anyway, right?
I want to
And
point something
so,
else out, something out about that real quick. If you remember from the show on the Heroes of Harvey, the police officer who died, what was it that his chief said? But exactly that. This is a expression of respect.
yes,
That people who do those types of jobs, people whose profession involves running towards danger instead of running away from it, give to each other. That is their last respects, is saying, this is what we're here for, and we know this can happen, and we do it anyway, and that is our courage, and this is his dignity. And
You know,
Yes.
maybe
so
if we stop disrespecting men and stop treating them as completely disposable, this wouldn't be a kind of thing where we can politicize something that's an actual real man's death. It's
What's
actual
really-
real person's death.
what's
Stop
really sick about
politicizing it.
this, what's really sick about this is what that congressman has done to, and I don't know if Congresswoman has done to the parents. Now, I don't know if there's a
Yeah.
living father or not. Everybody's talked about the mother. I haven't heard a word about the father, so I don't know what the situation is there. But this mother's grief is now complicated by politics that didn't have to enter into it. She was offered.
I was so disgusted. I was so disgusted by the fact that this woman who will never be, okay, who has not served and who will never be called to serve, right? She will never be called to serve. She probably has never been in a situation where it was her life on the line to save other people's lives or to serve a higher purpose, right? And she's acting. She says Trump is a total sociopath for telling this relative of this dead man he knew what he was getting into. Yeah, he did know what he was getting into. That's what makes his sacrifice noble. That's what makes it.
Well, that's
you know,
the thing.
and
That's
I'm
the
just
thing.
like,
What this
point.
congressman
Oh.
did is, okay, so you have Trump went to somebody who is in the profession for advice on how to comfort a parent who has to bury their child. And it doesn't matter how old you are, how old your children are. That is, I've seen friends go through this. I've seen parents of my friends go through this. I've had friends buried.
Yeah.
I've seen my mother-in-law go through this, and I've seen her bury grandchildren. And you don't take away someone's ability to comfort someone who is burying their child. You just don't do that. It is more cruel than just about anything else I can think of. And it is more heartless than taking. The closest I can think of is taking food away from a starving person. Honestly, there's, I hate to say this, but I would put this congresswoman's behavior on par with sexual assault, because what she did was it was very clearly as emotionally traumatic to a parent who was burying their child, a parent who had lost their child, as it is to lose your bodily autonomy.
Oh, she pissed all over that
she?
man's. She pissed all over that man's body and then spiked the football on it.
Well, and then that's
what
it.
she did.
He isn't suffering. He's gone. He, as much as it matters to the people who loved him, and it does, and as much as it matters to the country that respects him, and it does. It's the person that she has hurt the most is the person that she's claiming to speak on behalf of. Trump was offering comfort by hailing her son's dignity and courage. And this woman took away that dignity and the memory of that courage. That, if I was going to call anything a sin, I would call that a sin. I'm not even that much of a religious person. I would call myself an agnostic, bordering on atheist, but that is a sin. And
Well, it
shame
at
on
the
her.
best, it betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of the mindset of the people who choose to serve, right?
Well,
Who
and it
choose
also
to serve.
betrays a lack of consideration for the person that she was claiming to protect. Because
Yeah,
there are two ways.
absolutely.
There are two ways that could have been taken. And she just influenced that woman to take it in the worst possible way in the most vulnerable time you could have in your life.
I can't even imagine.
I don't
it.
think,
It makes me
I
so
don't think,
fucking sick.
like, there
It makes
is
me so
no-
fucking sick.
There's
I don't think that mother is going to be affected. Like,
she's
Obama
affected. She's already upset.
No. But what I'm saying is, Obama never made any calls. Okay, he never made any calls to families, right? Trump has chosen to make calls to specific families and to certain families, and I don't think that the mother of this soldier, right, is going to be influenced in, or his wife, I guess, but I don't think she's going to be influenced in the way that, in the sense of she's going to see Trump as some kind of horrible sociopathic monster.
Well, I don't know what she's going to see Trump as, but I know that she has felt compelled in her moment of grief to come out and defend her friend for politicizing her grief and for politicizing that conversation. And so now there's a public fight over her feelings right at the moment. Like I said, when she'll never be more vulnerable in her entire life than right now. And she'll never be more vulnerable to manipulation. And she'll never be more vulnerable to having that wound opened over and over again by seeing this in the news and hearing people talking about it and hearing people fighting over it and seeing people fight over the politics around it and everything. All of that. Like I said, what her so-called friend did to her was extremely inhumanly cruel. Just absolutely cruel. This should not happen. Now, I'm going to stop the conversation with that because we're off topic again, and I'm going to pull it back to the topic.
I actually have a point
all
that
right.
is related, though. As horrifying as this all is, and it is terrifying to me, let us look at the ability for a single, or in this case, two women, to affect the entire emotional narrative of the nation. Would that ever have been the case if it had been the father or the husband of a woman? Well, she wouldn't have been serving in combat because we don't do that. But would this ever have been the case? Would we ever all, as a group, emotionally mourn the death of a woman in this way? I think we'd mourn her death, yes, but it would never have been this kind of like the women's ability to control the narrative. That's very disturbing to me.
It is, and that's something that I'm gonna bring up something that's related to that. It's loosely related. We've talked before. We've previously mentioned the dysfunction in family and criminal court systems, and that was fought for with that specific type of manipulation. Women as victims, women being afraid. The narrative of rape culture, the narrative of women being in fear of men all the time, that is where those laws came from. Was that push using that. But going on from there, the lack of due process that we've talked about, the prejudice against fathers that we're seeing, the mandate to believe female accusers and intimate partner in sexual violence cases, those have combined to make marriage a high-risk endeavor for straight men. And obviously, it's not the same in same-sex relationships for men. It might be for lesbians. But you combine that with the way feminist agitation against any judgment of women's behavior and women's attitude, has led to a society that fails to teach boys to vet potential partners for character. And you have an environment in which, on reaching adulthood, they have every reason to shy away from the institution of marriage. And this is one of the reasons why I say it's MGTOW isn't a senseless reaction. It is a
Oh, of
reaction
course
to
it's
the
not.
environment. Now, mostly unequipped to identify a potentially trustworthy female partner, men today who choose to marry end up risking deeply investing their hearts, their souls, their wallets, their blood, sweat, and tears in their families, only to have it all ripped away from them on the moment their partner experiences any dissatisfaction with her life, because she doesn't have the accountability behind her and within her to work at that relationship. And the court system, which by virtue of being involved should equally protect the interests of both sides of the marriage contract, and it is a contract, generally favors the woman on all fronts. And if she thinks they won't, feminist lobbied discriminatory family and sexual violence law can be exploited with little or no immediately obvious potential repercussions for her. Most women don't think of what it's going to do to their relationship with their children or their reputation in their community. They only think about that property and that custody. And that gives them the edge. Now, what I wanted to bring that up for is, Karen, this is partly a result in an imbalance in the way coverture and similar legal standards changed over the decades, isn't it? I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about coverture and what has changed for women and what has not changed for men.
Well, coverture is one of those things that it conferred obligations and benefits on both parties, right? So when women got married, when women were unmarried, they were femme sole, which is a legal term. When they became married, they became femme covert, and they essentially agreed to exist under the umbrella of their husband's protection, right? And in the Declaration of Sentiments, one of the things that they said, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others said, was that man has essentially arranged things so that if married, a woman was, in the eyes of the law, legally dead, or civilly dead. She was an unperson, right? But that it's in itself is a complete falsehood, because if you're an unperson, if you are legally and civilly dead, non-existent, and only an extension of your husband, then you would not have a whole host of entitlements under the law, right? And one of the most interesting things is in terms of how marital laws changed in the UK. And I'm just going to give an example, because women existing under coverture, they had something called, there was something called the law of agency that they existed under on a day-to-day basis. And they had a vested interest in maintaining the good credit of their husband, because they were essentially authorized by law to act as their husband's legal agent, in the sense that they were authorized by law to go into debt in their husband's name. So they would go into any store in the neighborhood, purchase goods, say, put it on my husband's credit, right? And he will take care of the bill. And this was a day-to-day kind of entitlement that women were existing under. That it was something that they experienced daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. Anytime they entered a store and said, put it on my husband's tab, right? They were exercising a legal entitlement under coverture to purchase goods for their household without money, without actual cash, just on the promise that their husband would pay, right? And so there was that, right? On the other hand, when the marital property laws changed in the UK, the event that spearheaded this, okay, was a robbery. A woman was robbed in London, I believe, and her purse was stolen. I think there was 20 pounds in it or something like that. Dog, shut up. And there was 20 pounds in it, and she was shocked to notice that on the police blotter and on in all of the records of that robbery, that money was described as belonging to her husband. She was a middle-aged woman. She had been living her entire married life with no idea that technically any money that she carried on her person, any money that she earned, any money that was gifted to her by her husband, any money that she had, was technically legally the property of her husband. So you literally had a situation where women were exercising their entitlements on a daily basis, right? But sometimes went their entire marriage with no idea of the handicaps that they were laboring under coverture, because those handicaps, everything in the marriage, all the marital property is technically the property of the husband, right? That only ever came into play if you were robbed, or if he wanted to sell a piece of property and you did not want him to, and that was a piece of property you brought into the marriage, or if he mismanaged the portion that you brought into the marriage, or whatever. So only when you had a grievance with his decisions as to what he was doing with property that you felt was yours, only then would you have come up against this legal reality that technically it's his to dispose of as he sees fit, right? But on a daily basis, right, women were benefiting from coverture. Just like it was just something that was natural to them. And when feminists brought in these changes to the Marital Property Act, the Women's Marital Property Act, I believe it was, that there were two changes, two acts that went through in the UK, right? It essentially defined women not as equal partners to the marriage with equal access and authority over the marital property. No. That's not what those laws did. What they did was they essentially declared the woman, in terms of her obligations, right? She became her financial obligation. She became femme sole. She was a single woman, right? And when it came to her entitlements, she remained femme covert, right? She was still entitled to the obligation of him to support her. So what ended up happening was you had this situation where women, if they earned income or if they held property, they held that as a single individual, an unmarried individual, like a bachelor or a spinster, right? That was their property in their own right. And yet, as femme covert, she was still entitled to be supported by her husband. So now he's still got the same obligation to support her, but he cannot use her income to do it. By law, he cannot use, unless she chooses to. He cannot use her income to do it. He cannot even demand documentation of her income, right? And this was really important, especially in the UK, because the tax burden on her income fell on him as one of her necessaries as part of his obligation. So he needed to pay the income tax on her income and the property tax on her property. But as an individual, as a private individual with a right to privacy, she did not even have to, by law, provide him with documentation as to what her income was and what her properties were, so that he could actually calculate the taxes owing on that and pay those, right? Out of not her income, but his. So we had this absolute bifurcation of coverture, wherein all of the rights and entitlements that women had under coverture and the protections and all of those things remained in place. All of the obligations and responsibilities for men remained in place. And all of the obligations and responsibilities for women were summarily removed, and all of the privileges and entitlements that men had enjoyed under that system of laws were done away with, right? So you had, this is what feminists, early feminists did by presenting coverture as a one-way street of oppression. The exact same way feminists describe everything. The man is in charge, the man has all of the power, the man has all of the authority, the woman is at his mercy, and that is how things work, and she has no legal protection, and absolutely 100% he is the one with the power and she is the one with none, right? And that's how they described it. That's how they got these laws brought in. And the result was men going to prison for tax evasion because they could not afford to pay their wealthier wives' income taxes or property taxes out of their salary after paying for everything else, or whose wives refused to pay their taxes and refused to provide documentation of their income and property.
Exactly. We have to look at why that is, though. It's because we have an intrinsic evolutionary, socio-psychological reason for wanting to protect women. And unfortunately, what happens is, as a result, we end up with these terrible backwards laws that go back very far, as you have thoroughly explicated. And it's not just those, but I mean, obviously, in modern society, we have far worse legal legislation that gives such priority to women. This is all because, society prioritizes women. And if we can never really accept that, we're never going to be able to move forward, I don't think, to just understand that as a function of our evolutionary social psychology, of course we prioritize women, or excuse me, society prioritizes women because they are the producers of the forwarding generations. It just makes sense. It's just, when you look at it logically, it has horrible outcomes.
Well, it can have horrible outcomes. I don't think it always does. Sure. I mean, but I think that we are at a point now where things are so relaxed, and we're not engaged in subsistence living, even the poor, right? And I spent 15 to 18 years of my life essentially under the poverty line with kids. And I was never engaged in subsistence living of the sort that the poor would have been engaged in 200, 300 years ago.
Or the poor are engaged in Africa right now. Exactly.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And so I think that because we have the and this is why, and I'm going to get political here, this is why whenever leftists, and there are a fair number of leftists on Reddit, in particular on the men's rights subreddit, who are essentially, we need to socialize. We need to bring men's issues to the attention of government, so that government can pay for men's shelters, government can pay for this, government can do that, right, for men. And my response to that is, the more money the government can extract from people, has justification to extract from people, the more money they will give to women, and the more they will extract from men. That's just the way it is. And essentially, the more society gets into a position where we're safe and we have luxury, and even the poorest of households have a refrigerator and a TV, right? And maybe 2 game consoles and a computer and a cell phone, right? The more we get into that situation where even the poor are brought up to a certain standard, right, the more luxury we have to only care about women, right? And this is really the thing, because when women on an individual basis needed the investment of individual men, we had a requirement in our society to care about men, not to care about them in the compassionate sense, but to care about them in the sense of, this man has a woman and children, right, that he is supporting, and we need to at least facilitate his ability to do that, right? But the more government is able to take over that role of supporting women and children, the less need they have to care about the well-being and facilitating the success of any individual man, right? Government can just do it for those
government
men.
is the great big daddy, is it not? That is the whole point. Is that I mean, yeah, again, not to get overly political, but the whole point. And sorry, I am losing my voice very bad, extremely. But the whole point is that the government becomes the great big ultimate father figure in this system or system of systems. And then it becomes exactly why we want to prioritize women over men, because to make men into disposable units that have no real purpose in a system of family, well, exactly then, if your ultimate goal is to make the government the father, then of course you want to make the man the least important individual piece in this game. He becomes a nothing. You want to make him nothing. And then, you know, when you look at that, well, it all makes sense, doesn't it? Why we have been systematically destroying maleness and destroying men.
And there's another aspect to this. I'm not losing my voice. It's just, unfortunately, October has a grip on it. So I'm probably going to sound bad too. But government, the thing that government is made of, and that is government workers, have significant incentive to grow government to maintain their jobs. And so they're not going to try to solve this problem. This is something that the public has to focus on. It's to their benefit if women don't need men. It's to their benefit if women depend on the government. It's to their benefit if that continues to increase in a lot of ways. Now, that's not the entire government. There's also government that it would be to their benefit for men to be more utilitarian, and men are more utilitarian when they're married. And it's easier to push them around because they've got a family to protect. But if the government becomes women's father figure and white knight against men, then they may lose the need for men to be utilitarian, aside from the ones who preserve infrastructure, who basically keep society going. And as society becomes more automated, that's going to reduce as well. So it's really up to people in society who are aware of that danger to push back against it. And Paladin Pun has a great way of putting it. You can't just ask the Hydra to behead itself. Now, can we, Hannah? That is excellent. And no, you can't ask the Hydra to behead itself. And you can't ask one guy to go in there and do it either. Right now, that's kind of what we're relying on. And it's not going to happen as long as we don't hold the rest of our politicians accountable and insist on getting people in there. If the people that are in there won't do it, insist on getting people in there that will. So that's our job, and that involves paying attention, and it involves not just voting, but arguing, talking to other people, getting the information out, everything that I've talked about before, and not giving up on your own family and your own rights.
It really involves making the extrapolations, right, that I think are necessary, right? Okay, so men are 40% of university students now, and in another 15 years, they're going to be 30%. Okay, so who are women going to marry, right? And if they don't choose to marry, how are they going to arrange their lives, and how productive are they going to be? And especially if the men are unemployed or unemployable, right? How is society, where is the tax base? Where is the revenue going to come from to provide maternity leave and daycare and all of these things, free birth control and all of these things that women are demanding? Where is the tax
the universal basic income that our crazy tech gods are saying we should get?
Yeah. Like where is all
that
of this
universal basic income going to come from?
Yeah, where's it going to come from? And one of the best examples that we can give as advocates to people of how corrupt the system is and how fucked it is, right? And how government, it is an absolute government racket, right? Is a single welfare mom and child support. Okay. So when a single mom applies for welfare benefits, right, she is automatically and involuntarily put into the system. She must name the father of her children, right, so that the government can seek child support from him. And the reason for that is that the government claws back every fucking dollar of child support that they extract from that man, from that woman's welfare benefits. So the woman and her children are no better off. If she is entitled to $1,200 a month in welfare benefits and entitled to $400 a month in child support, if they can get that $400 a month of child support out of that man, she will only receive $800 in welfare benefits, plus the $400, minus a small fucking fee, okay, for having collected it. And, okay, so she's no better off. The kids are no better off. The state is better off. And on top of that, for every single dollar of child support that is extracted by a state agency, right, in the United States under Title 4D, right, they get $1 in kickbacks from the federal government. So if they can collect $200 million in child support through child support enforcement agencies, which is why they want to enroll every woman in these child support enforcement agencies, right? If they can extract $200 million from those men, they get an additional $200 million from the federal government that just goes into general revenue. It does not benefit the woman. It does not benefit her children. It just goes into general revenue. It just goes into state coffers. Okay,
well,
so
there's something to understand about that, though. They're not operating on a budget that is entrenched in the here and now and the money they're taking in right now. That's only part of the story. And I'm gonna describe one of the most ridiculous and most artistically and ingeniously perpetrated scams in history here. And I don't know if I can say it was deliberate or accidental, but it's definitely a scam. All right. So at least in the United States, our government borrows money from other countries to fund this shit. And right now, we have so much borrowed that our grandchildren are in debt. Any kids my kids have are in debt already. They will be born in debt. That is how this is funded. It is not funded by your tax dollars. Your tax dollars are going to pay for what they were doing when your parents were kids. And that is how the United States government works. That's part of it. The other part of it is, there used to be a system where when the president was elected, he would go through and replace employees in the government that the previous president had appointed. And there were whole departments would change over, and the total chaos would occur. It was referred to as the spoils system. You got government jobs for supporting the president, and it screwed everything up very badly. And they eliminated that incarnation of it. And what it was replaced with was every new administration we get grows the government instead. They don't replace people. They don't fire everybody and bring in new people, although Trump has fired a few. But they don't come in and the minute they walk in the door get rid of all of the previous administration's employees. What they do is they create mandates and they create new policy. The agencies and departments that are already in existence create new mandates and new policies, and those add to the existing government jobs, and those seats are the ones that get filled with the cronies. So we didn't get rid of the spoils system. We just changed it so that it's getting bigger and bigger. And now let me finish.
Okay.
Because this is something that people need to understand. In order to fund that, our government is borrowing increasingly larger amounts of money. And that has been going on for decades. Actually, it's been going on since they started taxing the public, and with the income tax system, I should say, because there were other taxes before that. And that has led to the situation that I've described, where your kids are already mortgaged, your grandkids are already mortgaged by your government. Essentially, you are wage slaves to the government. Now, that's not to say that I'm not coming out saying all taxes are bad. I'm not coming out and saying that you can't have a government, that you can't have some sort of system of organization, that you can't have some sort of, let's maintain a military, let's maintain roads, all this. I'm not coming out against all that. What I am coming out against is the spoil system, the increasingly burgeoning, growing monster blob government that we are building on the basis of the belief that it's your government that is responsible for every aspect of your welfare, and your government has the right to tell you what to do because of it, and your government has the right to start interfering in increasingly more and more mundane aspects of your life, to the degree where, like in New York now, they're telling you what size pop you can buy at fast food joints. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. And the only solution that I personally can see to reverse this, this is one of the reasons, not that men's rights is not the most important reason for it, not that bodily autonomy is not the most important reason, but this is one of the reasons why I fight for paternal surrender and male forms of birth control to be completed, because until men, who are the ones on whose backs this is funded, have control over society's reproduction, and until that control stays with the most accountable of the two people that are involved in the creation of a child,
it should be
that monster that I just described, that blob, is going to continue to grow. It will continue on this path until men are able to say, no, you don't get to be a single mom at my expense. You don't get to use daddy government to get into my wallet. You don't get a kid. I'm not paying, and I'm not producing. Tough shit.
Yes.
You're out of luck.
I agree. And one of the most egregious, like what I'm talking about in terms of the child support system, one of the most egregious cases that I read about, and it was in an article years ago, and it was about a state, I forget which state, but that was moving from paper checks, the government payments, the benefits payments were moving from paper checks to direct deposit. Now, child support agencies are able to garnish up to 80% of any government check. So your tax return, your tax credits, your disability benefits, your veterans benefits, up to 80%, right? Anything other than a welfare check, they're able to garnish up to 80% of that. But when it comes to the money in your bank account, they're allowed to take 100% of it. So the moment any of your money hits your bank account, the child support agency can go in, freeze the account, and take everything that you have, right? So you had people who were essentially living off of 20% of a disability check, and they got that 20% by taking their disability check to a check cashing place, like Money Mart or whatever, rather than a bank, and turning it into cash, paying a fee, turning it into cash. And so they were giving up 5% of their check in order to be able to actually get 15% of that check rather than zero, because if they deposited it into their bank account, would all be seized immediately. right? And this one man was telling his story. He had been on disability for 15 or 20 years. He was living with his adult son. Okay. His adult son was supporting him, and he was maintaining some level of dignity in that relationship with his living on the charity of his adult son by contributing what he could out of his disability check, which was around 15%, because he could take his check to the money mart, have it cashed, and only give up 5% of it and bring home, and pay for at least what he cost, right? The household. The switched from paper checks to direct deposits changed all of that. And he lost everything, his entire disability check gone every single month. And the hilarious thing is that the child who was supporting him, the adult child who was supporting him, is the child who that money was being seized to support. And none of it was going to the mother. None of it was going to that adult child. It was all going to pay back the state for the 4 years of, during that child's life where the mother had received welfare benefits. So essentially, you have a man who's permanently disabled, who his income, his benefits are being garnished at 100% to pay the state back for its outlay 15, 20 years ago, right? When they offered that woman at no cost to her, right? Offered to support her and her child entirely, unconditionally. Yes, you can have this money every month. We don't mind, because we're going to get every penny that we can back from this man who is permanently disabled. And now he has no income whatsoever. Right? So this is the insane thing about it. And of course, the state is also getting their kickbacks, right? Because every one of those disability checks that they seize out of his bank account now, right? Every single one of them is matched dollar for dollar by the federal fucking government.
And that's something else that needs to be pointed out.
Why wouldn't they do it?
I've harped on this before, and I get called left-wing by right-wingers and right-wing by left-wingers, and I'm not really either, and I will criticize both sides. The welfare reform laws that the Republicans passed during the second Bush, Bush 2, the sequel, administration, in the year 2000, that is what made this law. And states started capitalizing on it. They saw it coming. They started capitalizing on it ahead of time. And I know this because Ohio did it. They mandated paying child support through the state. You couldn't pay the mother anymore. You had to pay through the state. And they made it retroactive for a year. So any man who was not in arrears in Ohio had to fight tooth and nail to not remain designated in arrears. And that gave the state money from the federal government for collecting child support that men technically didn't owe, but under the state law they did. And I'm going to read one of the chats, the super chats. Xeranx says, gave us $5 and said, confirmed, Hannah is a filthy centrist. I knew it. No, I'm not a centrist. I would place myself somewhere on the border of the sort of the gray area between libertarian and anarcho-capitalist. And more leaning towards libertarian than anarchist, because I have seen that there is a difference in leadership capabilities between various individuals, and it's not wrong to recognize that. But in any case, you can't be lazy and let people take over because of that either. And I don't think either one of those areas is perfect by itself. There are aspects of both that I think are very sensible. There's also aspects of the true left, the classic liberal left, that I think are vital parts of our evolution as society. And there are things about the traditional right that are from our evolutionary history that are important as well. So you can't really place me in one of those boxes and say this is what Hannah is politically, because it doesn't work. And I don't think I would make that particular political group happy all the time. I'm not going to promote all of their ideas, and I'm going to promote ideas that all of them at some point or another are going to disagree with. All of that said, I'm going to pass the mic back, the proverbial mic, because obviously we're not even in the same state, back to Brian for the rest of the super chats, and that is going to have to be the end of tonight's show. I think I'm going to save the thing that I was going to make the next topic of tonight's show. I'm going to save it for Badger Talk next week, and we will go over it extensively on Badger Talk. But we are running out of time for tonight's show, so Brian, if you want to go ahead and read the rest of the super chats.
Okay. All right. So Mexi Man and Cheese gave us $5. Thank you, Mexi Man and Cheese, and says Corey Feldman equals hashtag me first. Cap Strong gives us $5 and says never had a problem. RSM stare, raised eyebrow, and a quiet smile seems to quell stupid in both sections. Wrong think. Okay, wrong think Asian. I think you already read that one. That wasn't a super chat. Astro Panda gave us $5 Canadian and says, Aiden, stay out of my dreams. Cool listening to you guys live for the first time. And then Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, I honestly hate the argument that MGTOW is just feminism for men. What laws did MGTOW create? What colleges do MGTOW control? And what media pushes MGTOW?
He's got a point there.
No, that's yeah. I agree with that. I don't like the equivalent stuff because it also presumes that you understand, like, not only the influence of MGTOW, but like what their arguments are. Ryan Field gives us $10 and says, why do the work to score a man to protect and provide when the state will give you a free ride? Don't be afraid to gain your goal. The only thing it'll cost is your soul. P.S. I got a job again. Was that a rap? Because I think it was a rap.
It won't cost your soul, but it will cost your kids their future.
Yeah. And then Grumplebee Abi gives us $5 and says, hilariously, it's likely that feminists are going to start advocating for the legalization of polygamy in order to get access to good men.
There have already been feminists who have suggested that polygyny is not something to dismiss out of some false sense of morality and some outdated attachment to monogamy, right? There have already been feminists who have made the case for polygyny. And don't call it polygamy. Polygamy just means multiple marriages. It's either polyandry or polygyny. Polygyny is multiple wives, polyandry is multiple husbands, and polygyny is really what they're arguing for. And it really is about women who are prepared to share one high status man between a bunch of women rather than settle for somebody who they consider beneath them. Yeah.
All right. And then French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says, I'll drag you kicking and screaming into anarcho-capitalist, dear Hannah. And then Ryan Field just gave us $2 and he says, it can be a rap if you want, but it's just a rhyme. You know what? It's rapping is just poetry with a beat, I guess. Kind of like songs are just
unless you're Eminem and you're rapping about Trump, in which case there is no beat and it's pretty lame.
It's pretty cringe.
Yeah.
Zeranx gives us $5 and says The Atlantic put out an article called "All the Single Ladies That Actually Mentions Women Will Spur polygyny or polygyny or gyny or whatever.
Polygyny.
Polygyny to share well-off husbands.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, The Atlantic did. There have been feminists who have actually suggested it, and yeah.
Now they're behind the pagans have been kind of doing that informally for decades, but they've been doing it both ways, and some people are able to handle it, and most people really are not.
Oh, polyamory is for men. Like, and this is just my experience as part of an erotica community that, involved a lot of polyamorous people and whatever. But in my experience, polyamory for men represents a situation in which their sexual peccadillos will not destroy their core relationship. They have one woman, they want to come home to her, right? They love her, they're devoted to her. When sex lands in their laps, they have a really hard time saying no, and often their inability to say no ruins their valued relationships with the women, the one woman that they choose. So they are inherently socially monogamous and sexually promiscuous, right? And whereas with women, in my experience with women, polyamory is simply an exercise in shopping for better offers. And the moment she finds somebody who can give her what she wants and is better situated than her core, quote, core relationship, she'll ditch that guy and go on to, so it's
that's what I've seen too.
It's a completely different thing for men and women.
Well, and the other thing I've seen is in open relationships, and this is really women have the sexual market.
I'm sorry. Before you go, I got a giant spider that I have to kill.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm gonna take off. Yeah,
I can read the rest of the ones I posted in there.
There's just a couple more, but I gotta go kill a giant spider because apparently we're all in danger. So I have to do this.
Why isn't Lindsay killing the giant?
No, she was the one that made the request. She can't do
okay, what? Just get the vacuum cleaner out and suck the giant spider up.
That doesn't necessarily always kill them, and
but then you have to empty.
No, they escape.
Then you have to empty out the vacuum cleaner, and it's scary.
Yeah, no, but you don't have to empty it right away. You empty it later after the spider's long dead.
Regardless, I'm gonna wrestle this back. With
respect
to
pay respects in case I don't come back. Lindsay wanted to say something though.
For the record, I didn't request it. I just came in and I was like, "There's a giant spider in the bathroom," and then I said #me too.
That thing picking on you, yeah. Yes. Well, clearly you should respect the spider's privacy. If it's in the bathroom, wait till it's done.
Rude.
Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to say regarding
my partner is an arachnophobe. I have no judgments about arachnophobes, and I am the designated spider killer. So
I keep them, used to anyway. I don't really keep them around much anymore because of that one that decided to have babies in my house. But I was keeping him around because I'm not an arachnophobe unless there is a spider directly on me and I didn't see it coming. But I am a mosquito phobe because a mosquito almost killed me once. No joke, that actually happened. A mosquito bite gave me an illness that almost killed me. And so I really hate mosquitoes, and spiders eat them. So anyway, but the point I was going to make about open relationships, which is like people get those mixed up with polyamory. Polyamory is a dedicated relationship between more than two people. Open relationships are relationships in which you can have more than one sex partner, but it's not a dedicated relationship, but with the other people besides your dedicated partner. And then there are swingers who only do this with other couples. And there's a important difference there because the one that's the least successful is the open relationship, and the reason is because women have the greatest share of the sexual market, and a woman in an open relationship with a man is going to get 10 or more times the offers for sex partners, and that's just if she's straight. If she's bisexual, it's much higher, and the guy ends up left out in the cold if the woman is not conscientious enough to make sure that doesn't happen. And unfortunately, a lot of gals get caught up in, hey, I'm the belle of the ball, everybody wants me, and they play around and they end up leaving their partner out in the cold like that, and it ends up ruining their relationship. Or they do the shop around thing, and that destroys their relationship. And so, guys, if the gal you're with proposes an open relationship, I would be extremely cautious.
Proceed
At
with
the,
caution.
it's like, I'm not judging if you want to do that. It's your game, your family, your life, and your bodily autonomy. But it's also your responsibility to protect yourself from being used and abused and discarded.
It's
And
probably
that's
better.
important.
It's probably better if you actually have to talk her into it.
Right. Well, even in that circumstances, it still ends up, it still can end up that way. And, you have the right to be treated with respect. You have the right in your relationship to be treated as a loved and wanted and desired and respected partner. And don't tolerate a change in your relationship that takes that away from you.
Oh
with
yeah,
that
no, and
said,
don't for a moment, don't just one more
one more thing.
Don't for a moment think that if she says, "Well, I can get way more action than you can," right? That she's in any way going to be a responsible partner
No.
in an open relationship.
No.
Yeah.
That's definitely a red flag. With that said, I'm going to finish the super chats. We have Mitch with £5 who said, "Vote Mitch 2020 Hack Broad Party." We have Ziranx at $5 said, oh, wait, I think that one was already read, the single ladies one. And that actually mentions women will spur polygyny. Yeah. We have Ryan Field with $2. "It can be a rap if you want, but it's just a rhyme." Mentalist MGTOW gave us $5 and said, "You're definitely covering some major causations for the rise of MGTOW philosophy. This is why I am sympathetic to the MGTOW phenomenon." And I wouldn't call it necessarily a movement, because they're not pushing people to join, and you're not pushing for legal change, which is why I agree that it's not the equivalent of feminism. And then let's see, we have Observing Libertarian gave us $5 and says, "Karen, there was a study done which showed that 50% of married women had a backup guy picked out in spite of being married."
Yeah.
That's
of course. Like every breakup, and I lived in a small town. It was 3,000, a little over 3,000 people. So everybody was all up in everybody else's business. Everybody fucking knew what was going on. And whenever there was a breakup, right, the woman in that breakup would be fully ensconced in a new guy's house within 3 weeks.
Well,
right?
that's,
So
women
you
start
can't
moving on
you
before
can't
they break it
fucking
off.
you can't fucking tell me that relationship did not begin right until she actually told her current guy that it was over. No, that relationship began 6 months before, right? And she just realized that, okay, yeah, no, this branch is better than that branch, and this tree is better than that tree, and now I will make my move, and I will move all of my shit into this new guy's place, right? And so I mean, like, you just this is just how things go, right? So guys end up bachelors sometimes for 2 years after a breakup. Women tend to move directly from the house of their spouse to the house of the man that they had on the back burner.
That is what my husband's ex did. The next one I have is Garlic Knight Drew gave us $2 and said, "Put the spider in the cup and send it outside." Well, unfortunately, it's Ohio in northern Illinois. Or Ohio, it's winter in northern Illinois. Same thing would happen in Ohio. Fall in northern Illinois, and the same thing would happen in Ohio. The spider's going
They
to have a
just
very
come
short
back in.
life. Well, if it survives the night, we've already.
They just
I'm
come
in
back in.
southern Ohio, and we've already had. I've come out twice at night and had tiny little bits of frost on my windshield. So it's getting cold enough out. Those
Oh
little
my
buggers cannot
goodness.
survive. Now,
Oh
I
my
know that
goodness.
this is not like we're not in Canada, where they would just come right back in because they know that shit's gonna happen. We're
We
in
had 3 centimeters of snow
snow.
on
I
something
know.
like the 8th of September.
Oh, and
So, the
you know
8th
the
of
first time
September.
that the first time that I told you how many inches of snow we had down here, you made fun of me for measuring it in inches instead of feet. So anyway,
Yeah.
going on with the we have one more. I misplaced it. Prim gave us. Oh, there's 2 or 3 of them here. Prim gave us money, and it jumped past it, and it's gone. Oh, there we go. Prim gave us $5 Canadian. Said meta. Then we have. I gotta scroll back down.
OMG, Prim.
OMG, like totally.
OMG. You're like totally paying yourself, Prim. Well,
Yes.
not really.
Hey,
'Cause
I
you do this for
volunteer.
free.
Hey guys.
You do this for free,
Guys!
so.
Seriously, the Happy Madman gave us $5 and said, "Doge show bobs and vagina." We don't have any bobs on this show. You're just shit out of luck. Sorry.
Okay, do you want plum bobs?
And then the
or
last thing is, Grumblebee Abby gave us $2 and says, "Kill all spiders. Replace with properly sized frogs." I like frogs, but I like bats better. And with that, bats are cuter. No offense to the froggies. With
Bats
that,
are
I'm going
cuter.
to.
They are.
They're adorable. I get to thank my co-hosts for being on the show with us to discuss this fun and amazing topic a second time. And even though he's not in the room now, thanks very much to the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, who does have a name and keeps everything running smoothly. And thanks to the audience for listening to us. And we will see you again in a week for Badger Talk, where we will be discussing, since I didn't get to bring it up tonight, the massive Twitter tantrum over Harvey Weinstein's scandal coming out, and the subsequent hashtag seizures that feminists went through, and how that relates to male-female relationships. So be looking forward to that. I haven't got a title for it yet because I didn't know I was going to make it a show topic until tonight. And so look forward to it. Good night, all.